Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining our first Coffee and Credentials virtual coffee chat. I'm Michelle Martin, Chair of PRSA Detroit's Accreditation Committee, and in just a moment, I'm going to introduce our other APR committee members who will be leading today's discussion. Today's coffee chat is intended to be very informal, and we encourage you to ask questions, whether it's in the chat, raising your hand. I also have the Q&A turned on. We're here to help and show you how earning your APR is attainable and can have a positive impact on your career. So please reach out to any of us at any time to follow up with any questions or anything you'd like to chat through. So to start, I'd like to give our APR committee members an opportunity to introduce themselves. And Melanie, you just had a blog published for PRSA Detroit about your APR experience. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm Melanie Davis. I am the Community Relations Director for the City of Sterling Heights. I have about 30 years of experience in public relations. I've been a member of PRSA for pretty much that entire time. And I got my APR about 20 years ago. And I think it's been a pretty valuable thing for my career. And I'm excited to hear about the questions and get the conversation started.
Okay, good. Thank you. Jen, how about you? Would you like to tell us about your experience?
Sure, and I'm sorry I'm off video. I'm preparing for another meeting that we have shortly. My name is Jen Rosowski. I am a senior director for external affairs and strategic communications at an organization called Ed Trust Midwest. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization. I have had my APR for about 6+ years, and I did it at the same time that I was doing my master's, which was a pretty extraordinary experience. They went really well together, actually. And I would say my APR has been invaluable, not only for my career, but also just in completely changing the way that I think about strategic communications and how I do my job every single day. So I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Okay,
Nice to have you all.
good. Thank you. How about Karen? We have two Karens on our committee. Who'd like to go first?
I can go. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Cuff Cohen. I have my own small public relations consultancy. I've been in the business for several decades. I've worked for an agency. I've worked as a consultant. Now I have my own small business. I received my APR last May, and I agree with Jennifer. It's been invaluable. It has completely, I would say it filled in all the holes um, that I had about strategy, and it provided a very strong foundation for approaching any work. Like anytime I have to do a proposal or I have a public relations problem I need to address, I have the tools and I have that foundation, and it's made a big difference in my work. And I really want to encourage everyone, anybody who's on this call, to really seriously consider it. It's well worth your time. So I'm really happy to be here. And feel free to reach out if I can help anyone.
Okay. All right, thank you. And Karen.
Good morning. I'm Karen Swim, and I run my own PR consultancy, Words for Hire, and I've been doing that for 21 years. I came into public relations kind of in a crooked path. I started doing it because I was being hired by PR agencies and got to learn at their feet, and it was seemed to be kind of a career that was made for me, taking advantage of my previous experience in marketing and in sales and a little bit of operations mixed in with that. And so I decided to pursue my APR credentialing so that I would have a foundation and a framework to operate from. So it really just helped me to be a stronger, more confident leader in PR and contributed to me just continuing to be able to grow my agency and to demonstrate the value of my role as a strategic advisor. I'm very excited that people have showed up today and looking forward to the conversations.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I know in your introductions you touched a little bit on this, but I'd like to hear, just tell me or tell us more about what the APR really is. Like, what does it stand for? What are some of the things that really have stood out and really have made you a more, I don't know, more successful in what you're doing?
Mm.
If anyone would like to start.
Well,
I can go, and just to say that I think the APR for me, the two things that really stand out to me were, first of all, it's a way to take you back to, I always say it takes you back to the basics. Because there are new things that are, that come about every day in industry. AI wasn't a thing. The social media, when I started my career, social media wasn't a thing. And then even e-news, digital newsletters weren't a thing. And so there's always something new and flashy that comes around, but at the end of the day, those are just tools in the toolbox. But the basics of good PR strategy remain the same. Those are the constant. And I think that when you're running around and things are getting thrown at you, and it can be very chaotic in this business, I think being able to lean back on those skills and going back to the basics and the fundamentals of good strategy is critical. So that's always stood out to me. And then the other thing is that because I am able to do that and go back to the basics, and I have that good strategy skill set, it really allows you to get a seat at the table in terms of, management or leadership in the organization. They don't just look at me as somebody who, where they say, I need a flyer, or I need you to write this newsletter, or I need you to get this this social media post out. They understand that I understand strategy. And so they provide a seat at the table because I'm doing more than just execution. I'm providing sound advice to them at the leadership level.
Yeah. Um, if I can jump in, Melanie, and add to that, I used to pride myself on being a creative person, and I loved coming up with tactics. And I didn't realize they were tactics. I thought they were strategy, you know? And I would come up with this great idea. I was brainstorming, coming up with great idea. But I think what the APR taught me, or studying for the APR, is really understanding the difference between a strategy and a tactic. And while it's so much fun to go headlong into tactics, meaning the fun event or the newsletter or the great, you know, graphics, or, the way we're going to engage, it's going to be so much fun. It means nothing. It could be the most creative campaign you ever came up with. But if it does not answer the public relations problem, if it doesn't get at the guts of what your goal is and your objectives are, it means nothing. And that it was a great sort of comeuppance for me to smack me into adherence to, come on, Karen, you can do this. So I just put that creative inclination aside, not get rid of it by any means, but just put it aside and focus on the issue at hand. And honestly, the word strategy and strategic is thrown around so much, but until you've actually lived it, and and understood how it's a head trip. It's a real thinking process. And then you get to go into the creative after you've addressed the objective.
Mhm. Yeah, and that is such a huge part of the APR. It's the bulk of the exam, the RPI process, and we're going to talk about the RPI process in just a minute. Jen or Karen, is there anything you'd like to add?
I was nodding my head so vigorously. I know you cannot see that because I would just completely second and third that. I would actually talk about it in the context of RPI, but I'll hold on that in a minute. I will just say that doing and going through the process of the APR has completely, again, changed my way of thinking always. And I just had a meeting with a bunch of communicators yesterday in um, at another event. And we were talking about the problem, and the group went straight to tactics. And I said, I stopped them because changing your way of thinking, which the APR does, into, as you said, Karen, and you iterated, Melanie, you think about it in terms of the problem and your audience and how you are focusing on solving for that specific issue. You build your strategy around that, and then you think of then you get to go into all the fun things, the
Right.
tactics, the newsletters and the webinars and all the things. But you start with immediately solving the problem, and it just permanently reorients your brain and changes synapses and all the things that make you a better practitioner
Mhm.
moving forward. And to Melanie's point, it puts you into that seat of the executive table because you become the strategist alongside, which is the ideal, I think, purpose of being a great PR practitioner, that you are at the table conceiving of the strategy right alongside the C-suite, and that's where I think
Mhm.
the APR puts you.
So, I know, Jen, when you first came on, you had mentioned that you have a master's, I have a master's. And I've heard people say, oh, is it master's or APR? I think obviously it can be both and and it should be both. But is there anyone that would like to talk a little bit more about that, about the value of having an APR, even if you do have an advanced degree?
I can definitely say that while they worked extraordinarily well together as I was doing them together, which was a mind-blowing experience, they were still different. And as great as my master's in strategic communications program was, the APR was deeper in communication strategy. And I would say I think you need them both, but the value of the APR was like an X was I don't want to call it like the icing on the cake because it wasn't that. It was far deeper. It was like the cake, the batter, the frosting, the candles, all the things building
Flower.
upon building upon and alongside my masters. I think you absolutely need the APR along with.
Yeah, my experience with that was, I think when I was going through my master's program, master's programs, because they're part of academia, are very academic, right? So it helped me learn to synthesize a lot of different information. It really helped me in terms of research, conducting research in that aspect but the APR program to me was much more rooted in the execution of strategic public relations in the business setting. And so
Mhm.
I do think that, the research portion of it, the master's program was great because it really taught me a lot about that aspect. But at the same time, I think the APR was really rooted in, here's how this breaks down and here's how you roll it out in the real world.
And to that point, I think this is a good segue to talk about the RPI process. We keep talking about the RPI process. Again, it's a huge part of the exam. You have to also, it's also what your panel presentation is built around. Does someone want to jump in and tell us a little bit about what that actually means? What is RPI? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Karen Swim has not spoken yet, so I don't want to jump in. Well, the RPI is, it goes by a lot of different acronyms as you do this, do the work once you start studying it. But bottom line, research, planning, implementation, and evaluation. Um, and the plan, research. So you're talking about research, Melanie. That is a weak spot for me. I don't, and I think it's because a lot of companies don't take the time to do the research. They want results, you know? So research is so important because it gives you the data that helps you move to the next step, you know? So, and I think what the APR did is it also gave me, an overview, and it's really just an overview on research, like getting a master's degree. I didn't, but I considered it. I'm sure your hands are in that research very deeply. But the APR does give you an overview on the different kinds of research that are out there for you. Um, and then the other thing I wanted to mention, the next step after the research is planning. You know, planning who your audiences are, um, planning, and creating objectives too. This is really important too, that are measurable, very, very specific objectives. So, yeah, we want more customers. Well, great. How many and where they, who are they? The 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 APR forces you to be very specific, with the objectives. It may be unrealistic, your objectives, but you've got to start somewhere. You have to define exactly what you're going for. Because if you don't, you'll never get there. You'll never know that you got there. So objectives are what they call SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. There's a lot of different words people use um, for that acronym, but that's the goal, is to have them make sure they're smart. And lastly, I don't want to take too much more time here, but the last piece that was hugely important for me and very helpful was strategies. The next step in the RPI process after objectives are strategies, and to create a strategy with the APR in the APR thinking is I realized how important pulling in different audiences are, and how you can work collaboratively with other organizations to achieve those goals, and that would never have been a thought for me, working with influencers or other organizations that can help support your goals. But creating creating specific strategies. And again, strategies are not something you can achieve in one day. It's a long-term goal, that the APR helped me think in that way. And then lastly is evaluation, of course, is evaluating and measuring your success. And that's complicated, but it's very, very important. So if you've been successful.
One of the things that I think is really important too that I learned is quickly is that when you're talking about evaluation and you're talking about did this program move the needle, I really like the RPI model where it talks about the difference between impact objectives and output objectives. Because when I was early on in my career, I thought a great objective was, hey, I'm going to make it smart. I'm going to, put out 3 newsletters. I'm going to put out 2 news releases.
Right.
Work with, and then you realize as you're evaluating that didn't move the needle at all, like, or it might have, but I don't know. That's why it's so important to have those impact objectives that are really tied to your goal. Like you talked about, Karen, about your communications problem. What's the public
Yeah.
relations problem, and how does that tie back?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And the really interesting thing that I like about the RPI process is that it's continuous wheel. So you get to the evaluation and then you measure against your objectives, which are your SMART objectives, and you say, okay, did I get a 30% increase? Oh, I only got a 10% increase. Well, okay,
Hmm.
why? Then you go back into the
Hmm.
research part because it's just a continuous circle.
Hmm.
And then you can adjust your strategies and your tactics and such. And I think that is what is really great about it. Jen had a couple great comments in chat. She said, I think the APR rewires your brain.
Mm,
So that is a
totally.
really positive thing. As far as getting to the step where you are going to present your panel presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the panel presentation is, and then ultimately getting to that step where you are able to pass the exam. What are some of the things that you have done to prepare for it? And what are maybe some of those books that are helpful? As Karen mentioned, and this is one thing that always keep in mind, some of the textbooks that are recommended, some call it RPI, some call it something else, some call it something else, but it is still that four-step process. But what has been helpful for each of you as you prepared?
One of the things I think it was most helpful for me is because the test part, the multiple choice test part, was very different to me than the presentation and the questionnaire. And one of the things that I think was really helpful for me was a set of textbooks called Public Relations Cases. And it was literally case studies that we went through. And it would, each
Mm,
one of these, they were real life case studies of public relations cases from across the United States. And each one of them was broken down into the RPI model, or actually expanded into the 10-step, PR program. It had your strategies, your objectives, your tactics. It had your audiences broken down. It had your evaluation. It had all the research. And so I was able to literally look at those repeatedly and look at each one that was successful and how they had marketed. And then it gave me sort of a framework to make sure that my own plan that I was going to present followed that same model, and it was very clearly spelled out. I always tell people that are going for their APR and they're getting ready for that panel presentation and that questionnaire to make sure, like, you cannot be too overt about calling out what sections of your plan is a strategy, what section is a tactic, what section is an
mhm,
objective,
mhm.
because the reviewers, the panel, the judges that are looking at it, it is so helpful to have that clearly spelled out, because then we know that you know what the 10-step PR process is and what the RPI model is.
Let's talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the panel presentation. So because just for anyone who's not aware of the process for getting earning your APR, you have to pass a panel presentation first before you're able to take the exam. And your panel presentation follows the RPI process, and it's about an hour and a half. You present a project that you worked on, and you're asked, it's actually I enjoyed doing it because it's more of a conversation. Now, maybe it's different for others, but it's a conversation. The panelists are asking you detailed questions. And again, to Melanie's point, you need to know what's a strategy, what's a tactic, what's an objective, what's a goal, because they're different. Talk about maybe a little bit about how you prepared for that, maybe what your insights or your thoughts are about that. And then after that, I'm going to answer one of the questions that we have in chat.
What was the specific question you were asking,
Oh,
Michelle?
the how you prepared for your panel presentation, or what some of your thoughts or your insights are about the panel
Mhm,
presentation, and maybe
mhm.
some tips of for someone who's thinking, okay, well, I'm interested in getting an APR, but I don't know if I have a project or something that I worked on. What are your thoughts on that?
I can share that because I used a project I did for a volunteer organization that I volunteered for, or a nonprofit organization that I volunteered for. I created a plan for them, and because in my own daily work experience, I didn't have that opportunity to create those plans for clients. They wanted different things. And while I would have loved to create a plan for them, They were impatient, shall we say. They wanted to get to the guts of get me in the news, get me whatever. We don't have to talk about that. But so I used my relationship with this nonprofit to create a plan. So, there's a lot of flexibility. The organization, the Universal um, UAB, what does it stand for? Universal
Accreditation board.
Accreditation
Accreditation Board.
Bureau.
Yeah.
They're flexible. It doesn't matter where you get this material from. It's just that you show the process, that you understand the process. So I just wanted to share that you can create uh, something that it doesn't have to be something that you actually did in your work life, your everyday work life.
Mhm. And another point is it doesn't have to be perfect.
Mm.
When I did my panel presentation on a campaign that I worked on at an agency that I worked at, and we had one great measurable objective. Our
Mm.
other objective was um, more outputs versus outcomes. But to recognize that and to be able to say, if I were to do this again, I would this differently is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that a lot in my, but as long as the panel reviewers, I pointed that out and I said, look, in a perfect world, we would have done better research. I would have had a bigger budget. I would have done X, Y, Z. It didn't happen that way because sometimes that happens in the real world, but I understand that it should have been done that way. And that was good enough. They understood that I understood.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
We have a question in chat. It says for early career professionals, what do you recommend first, the APR or a master's degree, especially if your undergraduate degree isn't in PR, which I think probably I know mine is not in PR. Mine was in journalism.
Yeah.
I don't know about the rest of us. What are your thoughts on that? Would you go master's degree in public relations or APR? Was
So
there?
this is going to sound really strange, but it was something that stuck with me all these years. So, one of my adjunct professors in my master's degree program said something to me that I thought was pretty profound. And she said, look, when you are in your master's program, you're not really learning anything new about your discipline. It's just kind of reaffirming that you know what you know. And I thought that was really interesting because, in a way, she was right. I didn't learn much more about the practice of public relations in my master's program. Like I said, it was much more about the research and that kind of thing. So I think as long as somebody is willing to take the time to go through the textbooks that are important, um, to take the APR, I don't know that you need to get your master's degree first. I still think both are important, but I also think that you can take the APR before you've had. I mean, clearly people take it without having a master's degree and they do just fine. If you did not have PR as your undergrad, though, I would highly recommend some of those really strong textbooks that we all used to prepare for the APR. But again, I think that's important whether you had APR or whether you had public relations as your bachelor's or not. I think you still have to go through it. I did.
Any other thoughts on that question? Um, Speaking of textbooks, I know there are some, for anyone who doesn't know this, if you go online, you can download the APR study guide. And that is so helpful for preparing for the exam, but also knowing what, some recommended textbooks and such. Does anyone have a favorite textbook that they used? Or I know there's a few that are on the recommendation list.
Effective Public Relations, the
Okay.
EPR by
Yeah.
Cutlip and Center.
Yes.
It's like the Bible, I guess you call it. It's excellent.
Mhm. Agreed. That was my favorite.
That is a good one.
Mhm.
I'm really curious to hear from our guest here because we've been talking a lot and I don't know where people are in the process. Has anyone started the process or are you willing to share some of the challenges that that are holding you back from moving forward that we could maybe help answer?
I'm happy to hop in. My name is Leonard. I'm with the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. And I know a few people on this call, so it's great to see some familiar faces. Um, so for me, the APR has been, let's just say, a long journey. For me, I've been off and on. In fact, I started when Michael was still teaching the class, Michael Henry. And so I completed all of the modules, all 10. I can't go back to them now because that platform is now
Yeah.
gone. And so one of the questions that I had is that, I'm somebody who, again, was on the old system. I did all the modules. I'm done. I'm at the point now where I can do my panel presentation. So I might actually see some of you guys when that time comes. And I'm preparing for it right now, putting it together. What is the process? Is there, how do I schedule it? Where do I need to go? I was also wondering, since that again, that platform is no longer in existence, did the process for getting your APR change? Is there some other things I need to complete before stepping into that panel presentation? So if you guys could clear that up for me, I think that would be wonderful.
Does anyone want to take that? I do want to mention though, before someone jumps in, those now the modules themselves are not available, but the recordings from those classes are on YouTube.
Mhm.
So you can go back and watch the classes from the previous APR course if you're interested. And I can send you a link to that.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah. Does anyone
Yeah.
want to talk about the process?
Um, I think you can also, by the way, Leonard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, you can access some of the presentations people did, the panels. You know how Michael used to link panel presentations uh, that people did if people wanted to, the slides?
Mhm. Yes.
So that will be very invaluable for you to look at some of the other folks' panel presentations because they did them sort
Yes.
of as a final step before they did it for their actual panel
Yeah.
reviewers. They would
Mhm.
do it for the course, for the online, the cohort, and it was great. And it was great. It'll be really helpful for you to see how other people approached it and what the feedback was. Whether they were kind of on target or the feedback was, well, your objectives were vague. Just those kinds of comments will really be helpful. I think that's a starting point. I had a mentor and I asked her for her panel presentation to tell you the truth. I said, "Do you have so I saw hers and I started thinking, okay, this is great. How would I adapt this? How would this become my own, with my content? And you got to start somewhere. So why reinvent the wheel? You'll create it. It will be unique to you, because your story and your PR problem, if you will be unique. But at least you'll see the format. I think the format is really important. You got to start somewhere. So I would really look at other people's panels and see how you can adapt it to make it uniquely you.
Yeah, and a few other points. Those recordings that are on YouTube, the panel presentations that the people did in those classes are part of that. Also, I was hosting the course when Michael wasn't available, so I have the slides from those courses I can send to you if
That would be great.
that
And
would be
I
helpful.
remember you filling in for Michael quite a bit towards the end.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, I
yep.
remember.
Yep. So yeah, I can share those with you. And I'll connect with you and send you my email and all that if you don't have it. Um, To 1.2, I wanted to mention, and we have another question in chat I want to get to for sure. But as far as the process goes, um, one thing that differs, what we've always, and this was what we did and we talked about in the course also. PRSA, if you go on their website, they have a process and they want you to apply immediately for first apply for the APR and then go through the process. We always have recommended that you go through the process and then you apply because you have 1 year to do it, or else you have to reapply or extend or whatever. And that's so that is one point that we've always talked about. But the other thing too I want to mention is that we, the APR committee, are here. So if you are working on a panel presentation, send it to us. We will talk, we will meet with you, we will, help you work through it. If you have questions, same with the exam. All of those things. We're here, we're that resource. So don't forget we're here and we want to help. So when you're ready, um, to go when you're ready. Maybe my recommendation would be reach out and if you have a panel presentation put together, reach out. Let's start there. And then when you feel ready, then we can help walk you through the process of this is how you apply and then we'll schedule your panel presentation. Once you pass the panel, then you can take they changed it a little bit since even when I did it. You can take the exam like the next day. So
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And the exam is all online now. You don't have the option of going to a testing center if you want. So
Awesome.
anything else with the process too, or Leonard, do you have any other follow-up questions related to that?
No, this was all really helpful. And appreciate, you guys being willing to take a look at my panel presentation.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said, I'm in the process of putting it together. I'm trying to spend at least an hour a day piecing it together. So again, I'm just tired of waiting. It's been a
Yeah.
long time. Life has kept happening. So now I'm like, I'm getting it done this year.
Yep. I was
Okay.
just going to say, Leonard, I encourage you just to move forward because it got put on my to-do list for several years, I'll be honest, And finally, I just said this is the year. I'm just done. I'm moving forward. I knew at a certain point I knew exactly the words that were going to come out of Michael Henry's mouth because I knew the course so well. So it was time, and you've put in a lot of time and just trust. You've gone through the modules, trust that you know this, and and put a date. In 3 months, I'm going to have my panel date or I'm going to be done with this. So
Yeah,
I really encourage you to you've done the work. So it's time.
yeah, absolutely.
I,
Thank you
I
all. I appreciate it. Oh, sorry.
I would also add for everybody else, and for you, Leonard, I have no doubt you'll kill it. I did not have to do the panel presentation. I got my credentialing the year that they tested. Doing I had to go to the testing center and no panel presentation. So I got off easy, but I have been a reviewer for several panels. And I've also judged a bunch of award programs. So I see where people miss in the RPI process. I
Mhm.
would say you've done the work, whatever case you present, don't feel like it has to be the flashiest, the best, because you're already doing the work. You're already succeeding in your career. Go into this really relaxed and think about how to frame the work that you've already done through this process, making sure that you hit the points. And keep in mind that these are your peers who are rooting for you. They want you to succeed. So you're not sitting in front of a panel of people that are wanting you to fail. And
Mm.
so take a deep breath and do your thing. I mean, it really, I think it's that mindset, we get caught up of thinking like, oh my God, it has to fit into these little boxes, but it really doesn't. And I think that you will do really well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Another question in chat is someone is a department of one. She's been in her current role for 2 years, but her supervisors are pushing more toward a master's because the job will pay for it. Maybe that's less of a question, but a comment. Any further thoughts on that? I know we talked a bit about master's versus APR. Um, and then another question in chat is a few of you mentioned having your own agency or consulting practice. Did you have your APR when you launched, or did you earn it after? How, if at all, did it shape the foundation of your practice? So Karen and Karen.
I can jump in on that. So, no, I did not have my APR and I figured out PR on the job and it was kind of a shift. Marketing helped a little bit and I had the strategy part and a lot of the pieces, the research, I always did a lot of research, but I did not and I was practicing successfully. I went after the APR for myself, not because I thought that it would give me an elevation in my career or land me better clients. But what I will say is that it gave me even greater confidence in what I was doing.
Mhm.
And in corporate America, I had been like a lean Six Sigma trainer. So I learned to be big on repeatable processes. And the APR process gave me that learning RPI, learning a structure and a framework, because no matter how much things shift in the world, and right now is a perfect example of how everything is shifting, you always have this repeatable process that you can go back to no matter what. Like that does not change. And so it gives you like a North Star for your practice where
Mm.
you're confident and you could stand 10 toes down in your work because you know that doesn't matter what the social media algorithms are doing, doesn't matter if journalists are going away and media, the media that you depended on or media looks a little different. You have this framework that is a structure no matter what. And so how it can elevate the types of clients that you get because of the confidence that you have from having this credential. Even though clients may not know what the APR is, it's just the way that you present yourself in the world and the way that you show up. And once you have it, you'll start educating people and, really promoting yourself as a credential professional. And I think it also gives you a deeper commitment to what we do, a deeper understanding. You're more committed to the practice. And as a woman of color, I love seeing more diversity and I want to inspire other people to get into PR, to do this, and to know that they can shine and they can shape this practice in the way that they want to. So I think that this gives us, that confidence too. And it puts us in front of other people to show, like, hey, if I can do it, you can do it too.
Um,
Yeah.
I know we haven't talked about the exam yet, so I'd like to touch on that. And I know we also talked a lot about RPI, but the APR is more than RPI. It's copyright law, ethics, and so can someone talk a little bit more about that, about those other parts of the APR process and how they've benefited you in your career?
I want to throw something out about ethics. One thing that I learned getting involved with not only PRSA, but then my APR is the importance of ethics. I always considered myself an ethical person, but I really respect the fact that ethics is so front and center in the PRSA/APR process. Um, and uh, through that, it sort of drives, it's the lens for which you move through this profession. Um, and I learned a lot about that through the APR. You know, crisis communications, understanding um, what is one big thing that I learned was how the
legal law intersects with the APR and public relations practice. You know, you have to understand what is allowed and what is not legally. You don't have to be a lawyer, but you need to be familiar. And the APR taught me, it touched on those areas that I needed to be familiar with: copyright law, what else? Defamation and privacy, you know, things like that. And those are, you know, those are really, really important things to be aware of.
And it's interesting too, like Karen said, you always think, well, I'm an ethical person, of course, but the APR also teaches you that there's an ethical decision-making process. So it's not just, oh, this is my code of ethics and this is what I would do. There's an actual process for it.
Mhm.
And there's a process for a lot of things as you go through the APR, crisis communications and such, and then you see how those things intersect. There is, let's see, another question in chat. I'd love to hear how you all manage studying and preparing for the test while working full time.
Well, one of the things I could tell you that I did, and it's kind of funny, but like, I carved out some time. Leonard was talking about, I try to dedicate an hour each day. I think that's great because I think you have to do that in order to make sure that you have enough time to adequately prepare. But at the time that I went for my APR, I was working full time and I had two kids under the age of 5. And when it came right down, and I carved out some time every night to study, and I did. But then I think it was probably the weekend before the exam, and I told my husband, I am renting a hotel room and I am going to spend the weekend there. And when I was a musician back in college, and we always talked about woodshedding it. And it meant going out in the shed and practicing over and over again until you get it right. And that's what I did. I went into the hotel room and kind of shut myself in for 2 days and really, really knuckled down and focused on the text and did the practice exams over and over again. And then I felt very prepared, and I was.
Mm. There's a free practice exam online, by the way. So you can get a good feel for what the APR test or exam is like. And we'll talk about that in a minute. There are some things that we can share, some insights.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to talk about how they were able to manage, juggle, working? And
I had a weird process, just because I have weird ways of doing things. But for me, the biggest hurdle was not learning the information. It was rethinking terms and making sure that what I had been doing in practice